So welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I believe we'll probably have a few more people coming in as we move forward. Thank you so much for joining us. We are excited to share our session, Case Making for Evidence-Based Teaching and Student-Centered Instruction, with you all today. Today's session will be interactive, where we work to connect vital data and strategies with your experiences at your institutions. If you are able to, we invite you to turn on your camera and join us. We also have a parking lot for you to interact with today. If you have thoughts, questions, or comments that we can respond to at a later time, this is a good opportunity for you to put those down in there. And we've got a Padlet link that's going to be in the chat for you, so you can add those thoughts, comments, or questions. So let me get us underway here. So you're in evidence-based teaching and student instruction. This is session 1 of 2. We have a few little housekeeping details. We'll be working together over the course of this series, discussing important and challenging ideas to help you make a strong case within your institution. And it is vital to build community so we can work well together. So let's get us underway. Go ahead and say hi in the chat for now. And I am then going to get us started by handing it over to our facilitators, Dr. Trent Moorbutter and Dr. Tanya Scott. Tanya, it's all, Trent, no, you're going first. Trent, it's all yours.
Hey, welcome. It's great to be with everybody today. I am Dr. Trent Moorbutter. Again, very excited to be part of this whole project as we learn together and learn from each other. We're going to be doing some case making with regard to evidence-based instruction and student-centered instruction. I'm celebrating my 31st year as an educator. I cut my teeth, as I like to say, convincing 7th graders that math and science was essential to their future, teaching 7th graders algebra, and just sort of sharpened the saw all the way through my career. I've been so fortunate to have worked in K-12. I was a middle school teacher and principal and a high school teacher and principal, and then became in 2012 the vice president for instruction and chief academic officer at Nash Community College here in Eastern North Carolina. Yeah, I said Eastern North Carolina. I am coming to you from about an hour and 15 minutes east of Raleigh, a little town called Tarboro, where I live with my wife, and we've been here for about 20 years. I say that, I want to share a quick fun fact as well. As much as I've been in education and love doing this work, I've been facilitating professional learning around student-centered learning and instruction, high impact, high engaging instruction for the last 3 years, facilitated workshops, obviously in this virtual environment, for the last year and a half. One of the upsides, I guess, is it's exciting that we get to spend some time in a room together, a virtual room, even though we might be we might be spread out across the country. So thank you for being with us today. Looking forward to sharing. And a last little fun fact is I'm not actually originally from the United States. I'm celebrating year 4 as a United States citizen. I'm originally from Canada. I moved here in 2002. And became a citizen 4 years ago. So welcome to our session. I'll turn things over to my partner, Tanya.
Thank you, Trent. So my name is Tanya Scott. It's such a pleasure to be here today. Like Trent, I have a lot of years under my belt in education, over 20 years, particularly in community colleges, but I also work in the 4-year space as well. I've served a number of different roles. I started out actually as an instructional designer, worked as an adjunct faculty member, moved out to North Carolina as well. Trent and I both live in North Carolina. That was 100% not planned, but I live right outside Raleigh. My last position held was as Dean of the Public Technologies Services at WCAG Tech. I have a strong commitment to evidence-based teaching and student-centered instruction, so it's my pleasure to be here today to talk about case making in this space. And we're going to give you an opportunity to get to know one another in just a moment. Oh, also fun fact, I'm also from Canada, but I actually grew up in Montreal, and I've been actually in Raleigh since 2008 and in the United States for over 20 years now. Let's take a look at our session agreements before we get to know a little bit more about you. All right. So we've included session agreements here to help inform how we will work together, how we will communicate with one another, as well as support each other. And we're going to explore new content and challenge our practices. All of the activities we will do together today will both help you internalize the concepts that we have to share, as well as to model strategies for creating an inclusive learning space, so we could bring this information and strategies back to our own institutions. So we invite you to embrace these interactive moments and to consider embedding these types of discussions and structures that you're going to see today and throughout these sessions into your own practice. Community agreements are one of those modeling moments. So let's review the community agreements together. And if you can think of any additional agreements that you think are important to the group's success, I encourage you to share those in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself as well. So let's walk through these together. The first is listen attentively. So we're going to practice some active listening skills where we listen without thinking how we're going to respond. We're going to speak our truth. So whenever possible, we will use I statements. We will recognize the perspective that you are bringing, as well as validate differing perspectives from others that are participating today. We are going to encourage you to take risks outside of your comfort zone and lean into your own discomfort as we talk about topics that may be new or unfamiliar. And finally, feel free to use the chat for active engagement in today's discussion at any point in time. You can also send direct private messages as well if there's something that you don't necessarily want the whole group to see. And there will also be other features that we will be working with today, such as Padlet, Google Docs, where we will encourage you to also contribute there as well. I'll turn it over to Trent.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. Appreciate that. Yeah, and I love, as we think about those agreements and this idea of this building the sense of community, starting with our agreements. We know that community, especially as we work together when we might not know each other, this idea of a shared sense of community really does build a foundation for, as Tanya pointed out in our agreements, for us to take a few risks along the way, be academic risk takers. So we're going to give you an opportunity. We'd love to give you a chance to meet participants from various institutions represented here today. We're going to pop you into breakout rooms in just a second, but before we do that, you'll notice that in the chat, there is a Padlet link. We'd like to give you just a few seconds to go ahead and access that Padlet link, and on that link, go ahead and post your name, title, and region, your experience in this work. And you might be saying, well, what is this work, right? We're talking about this, again, really focus on evidence-based teaching and student-centered instruction, making a case for that. Why do we need to dig into that work? So your experience in the work, a fun fact, as Tanya and I just shared, a fun fact about yourself. And then just a quick look forward, right? What do you hope to learn or accomplish during our time together today? So if you will go ahead and access that Padlet link, we'd like you to go ahead and just click on that. I apologize, I misspoke. I think I said we're going to pop you into breakout rooms. We're not going to do that. We just want to give you an opportunity to add to the Padlet. Let us know, don't hesitate to let us know if you are having any issues with the Padlet link. Thank you. Norma's actually showing us the Padlet there. You'll notice that there is a little pink button, a plus sign on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Not on the screen we're sharing, but on your own Padlet link. When you click on that link in the chat, it'll open up in your own browser. If you click on that, I can see a number of folks working away in the Padlet, so that's great. Just get us started. right. Starting to see those posts in the Padlet now. Once you've had a chance to post, don't hesitate to take a look around and see some additional posts being made by new or existing colleagues in the session. So we know there's a chance that some of you may have met in introductory sessions, but we do want to give you an opportunity to, again, build that sense of community with new colleagues. If you've got some current colleagues in the room with you, that's fantastic. Just as a reminder, if you're having an issue with that Padlet post, when you open the Padlet link into your own browser, you will see what we're looking at on the screen together, but you need to open it in your own browser and just click on that pink circle with the plus sign down at the bottom. Thank you for showing us where that is, Norm. Appreciate that. And that will pop open a post, an opportunity for you to post. I see we're getting there now. That's awesome. Northwest Missouri State, Dr. Justin Millett, nice to see you here, ensuring that our historically underrepresented students have access to effective learning strategies. Fantastic, putting it right there on the plate. That's awesome. Teaching yourself how to play guitar, that's great. Matt Caprioli, lecture and brainstorm how a course can improve. Nice. I think that's that critical piece, right? Is always figuring out how we can reflect and improve on our practice, that whole cycle of continuous improvement.
I'm curious about Rennie's dog and displeasure with working online again.
Barking.
Oh no.
That's why I'm on mute.
We're kindred spirits. Literally about a minute before we were starting, both of our dogs just started going crazy. I'm like, come on. I'm honestly not sure what our dogs and cats will do if I have to go back into an office and leave them here by themselves. They've gotten so accustomed to having someone in the house with them all the time. All right, lots of posts.
Mm-hmm. Feel free to unmute and introduce yourselves, vocally as well. We'd love to hear from you. Great.
Mike, I love it, a home brewer. That's fantastic. I actually started a brewing, distillation, and fermentation program at Nash Community College about 6 or 7 years ago. Actually revitalized an entire textile mill around brewing operations in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. That's awesome. Mandy, I love it. Pack of golden retrievers one day. So I am loving all of these posts, especially related again to this idea of continuing to improve practice, learning new strategies, learning more about centering students in the pedagogy. I love it when we're calling out pedagogy. Quick story, I think about 10 or 11 years ago when I first started in the higher ed space, I got reminded very regularly that the higher ed space was about teaching adults, and that was known as andragogy. And what has happened over the last 10 years in higher education across the country really is that, with dual enrollment in North Carolina, we call it Career and College Promise. It has different names across the country, but we know as higher educators that we are dealing with more than just adults. And so when we're calling out pedagogy, that is fantastic. affecting change at institutional and broader levels. Absolutely. I love that as well. The idea that when we're changing what we can, right, those things that we can control or those things that we can influence, when we're working to have an impact, a positive change there, it does have that ripple effect that we will see that impact at a broader pace. All right, we're going to give you about 45 more seconds. Maybe we'll flex it up to a minute, but just to go ahead and get your Padlet posts. And we're going to actually save this link into your LMS so that you can circle back and review it at any time you want. To Tanya's point, if anybody'd like to jump in and add, we'd love to hear a voice in the room. Matt, I'd love to hear how you made it from Anchorage to the Bronx. That sounds like almost as an interesting a path as Tanya and I shared from, we're not quite as far north.
Alaska's on my bucket list.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. All right.
Okay, so we're here to support you throughout the session. And if you're struggling with the technology or internet or any other technical challenges, please do let us know. Today, we're going to be using webcams, obviously, polls, chat, breakout rooms, and old-fashioned pen and paper. We'll also use a couple of other technology tools like Padlet, like you've already seen, as well as Google Docs. And we'll do our best to give directions on using each of these tools, but please do interrupt us at any point in time. Ask questions if something feels tricky or isn't quite working. We've mentioned the LMS. And this also will contain support information such as contact information for Norma or Patricia. So you'll have access to their phone numbers there, so you can direct message them if you're running into any issues at all. And just think through, like, as we're using these technologies, think about how you may incorporate these into your own classroom, right? And practice some of these modeling and skills that we're going to be showing you today as well. Moving on to our objectives. So we're going to look at the objectives for this case making session here, and this includes what you'll be able to do as a result of this session and how we will get there. So let's take a moment to read these together. So as a result of today's training, participants will be able to make a strong case to build institutional capacity for evidence-based teaching and student-centered instruction, specifically using digital learning. And we will do that by discussing data related to instructional challenges based on equity and access, as well as student engagement and feedback, and clearly understanding the positive impacts of digital learning on equitable course design. I'm just going to pause there, let you have a moment to read these yourself. And if you have any questions at all, please unmute or place your question into the chat. Give you about 30 seconds. And our time together today serves as an introduction to evidence-based teaching and student-centered instruction. We're going to focus on the why this matters in our work and analyze data as well as case studies so that you're well equipped to make your case and support your institutional partners. Again, on pause right here. I'm going to check for questions. Just going to scan through, make sure nobody has their hand up. Okay, takes it back to you, Trent.
Awesome. So our time together, we are really going to focus on this idea of case making, right? That why are we engaged in these conversations? We're going to also, we'll get into the how and the what piece of it. We really want to focus on making the case again for this idea of being student-centered in our evidence-based and student-centered in our instruction. So in this case, the case making session encompasses the four pieces, the four sections that you can see in front of you. We're really going to focus on those first two, but all four over the next couple of sessions together: teaching challenges in introductory courses, student learning challenges in gateway courses. You can see those are bolded because those are going to be our focus today. But in the next session as well, we're going to look at evidence-based teaching practices and student needs. and then digital learning and evidence-based teaching. Right, so today, as I mentioned, we will focus on the first two topics. And by the end of the next two sessions, you'll be able to make a case for evidence-based teaching and student-centered instruction at your institution. I'm just going to pause there for a second because, again, that's why I got so excited to see all of those improvement statements, those continuous improvement pieces, the idea of digging into what is evidence-based teaching and student-centered instruction. So we're going to, again, really focus today on making the case for why we're engaged in the work, and how, part of that is for you all to really strip away some of the layers of the onion and focus on, dig into why you are. Hey, you might have that answer right on the tip of your tongue, but we're going to spend some time really digging through that. So as we get started, I want to encourage you, send your questions through the Zoom chat as they pop up, and excuse me, and we'll compile those questions and have an opportunity to respond to them either at the end of the session. They might be the kind of questions that we can dig into as a group together in the LMS, or reflect back on as we continue our work together. But again, we really want to focus on that why, the case making. Why are we engaged in this work? So as I mentioned, today we're going to focus on the case, this idea of why we're doing what we're doing. When we think about case making, we're exploring why evidence-based teaching practices and student-centered instruction matters. And again, I'm getting a little fired up on my side of the screen about how you all started on the Padlet post by calling those things out. When we think about providing those supportive, positive outcomes for minoritized and poverty-affected students, I think someone even called that out in the chat already, that it's important for us to focus on all students. Yes, hashtag all means all. That's my mantra. But we know that we need to spend some attention on teaching practices that put minoritized students and poverty-affected students at the center of what we do. Case making also explains how to get involvement at all institutional levels. Right? We know that that's critical in moving the needle on improving outcomes for these students. So these sessions will prepare you with the data, the tools, and the strategies to make a strong case to your peers and implement action.
Thank you, Trent. So we're going to spend 2 sessions on case making. So our first session today, we're going to focus specifically on evidence-based teaching and student-centered instruction through teaching challenges in introductory courses, as well as student learning challenges in gateway courses. And at the end of this session, participants will be able to make a strong case to build that institutional capacity for evidence-based teaching and student-centered instruction using digital learning. And what we mean by that is, yes, we definitely want to focus on our own individual courses, but ultimately we want to build that capacity at our institutions so that our colleagues and our peers are working alongside us in practicing these evidence-based teaching and student-centered instructional practices. In next session, session 2, next week, next Tuesday on January 25th, we'll focus on equitable digital learning at scale. So now we're building out scale. We'll focus on evidence-based teaching practices and student needs, as well as digital learning and evidence-based teaching. And as a result of this session, you will be able to make a strong case to build institutional capacity to serve Black, Latinx, Indigenous, poverty-affected, and first-generation students, specifically through digital learning with an equity-minded focus.
So the purpose of our work here today, as we think about the context, right, is to seriously consider where there are equity gaps within our educational context, and to consider ways we can replace those gaps with strategies that bolster student experiences and outcomes for those who have been traditionally marginalized, right? Gateway courses slow down or derail, in some cases, student progress. And data shows that poverty-affected students and Black, Latinx, and Indigenous students are tongue-tied here, disproportionately held back by gateway courses, right? Pay close attention to this idea of gateway, right? They're supposed to, when we think about a gateway, that's where we step into for opportunity, but often those gateway courses are actually gatekeepers, right? They're held back by those gateway courses due to systemic barriers contributing to equity gaps, leading to lower graduation rates. So we think about evidence-based teaching and student-centered instruction that helps academic leaders, faculty, and instructional support staff to take a look, excuse me, at the strategies listed here for us. Adapt instruction to student needs and capabilities. Promote active and collaborative learning. Improve student engagement. Support learners and timely and personalized feedback. Invite, assess, and draw on students to share previous knowledge and experiences, right? So we think about these factors. These are critical in terms of helping students move from where they are to where they dream to be. And really, what I love about these points, again, we talk about where this evidence-based teaching and student-centered instruction is coming from. We're thinking about the work that we do, right? Too often in higher education, as we look back, and I'm thankful it's a long way back, but we still have work to do, that there's this idea that if students just did more, if they just worked harder, if they just were more motivated. But what I love is that we're turning that focus to what we do, right? So adapting instruction to meet student needs. That makes sense. That's something we can do. Promote active and collaborative learning. Again, as educators, that's what we can do. We can make those changes. When we say, well, students just won't get engaged, again, that's up to us to improve that student engagement. Support learners with timely and personalized feedback, right? It no longer works, and we know this. What does the evidence say? What does the research say? We know that we can't provide students with a midterm exam halfway through a semester and expect them to be able to turn things around if they haven't been successful. And then invite that assess. Let's really tap in and leverage students' lived experience. The value and experience and prior learning that they bring to our classrooms is rich and diverse. Let's capitalize on that. Let's leverage that to make learning better for all of our students. So we're going to actually, as we take a look at those words, what we're going to do is we're going to pop you into paired breakout rooms and just give you a couple of minutes, right? Let's take a few minutes in partners to discuss what you are seeing in the field. Now, this is a bit of a soapbox moment for me, as I think you all can just tell. So put my thoughts and feelings aside for a second. And what we'd like you to do is just to consider, what are the top challenges faculty are experiencing in gateway courses? Give about 30 seconds to reflect on that. What are the top challenges faculty are experiencing in gateway courses? Let's also be thinking about what challenges do students identify as the primary obstacles to success in gateway courses? And how do these challenges vary by race and socioeconomic status? So a couple of sometimes difficult things for us to consider and questions for us to answer. Certainly not that we're going to come up with any real pinpoint answer today, but this again is all about making the case for why we are engaged in the work and help move you in that direction as well. I mean, in the next session, we're going to continue to build on what we're talking about. But we are going to go ahead and pop you into pair breakout rooms so you can just have a quick back and forth. We're going to give you 4 minutes to discuss your responses or thoughts around those set of questions. What are the top challenges faculty are experiencing in gateway courses? And then what challenges do our students identify as primary obstacles to success in the gateway courses, and how do those challenges vary by race and socioeconomic status? Any questions before we pop you into those breakout rooms? Norma, I'm not seeing any questions. Partner, are you seeing any hands up or any questions pop up?
I have not. I think we're all ready to go.
All right, let's do it. 3, 2, 1, let's have some fun in those breakout rooms. All right, I believe we are coming back, so welcome back. I almost can't say that in the virtual environment without giving you a little bit of welcome back, Cotter. Welcome back. We're glad to Zoom let you back with us. All right, anyway, enough of that. All right, so what are those top challenges that faculty are experiencing in gateway courses, and what challenges are students identifying as the primary obstacles, and then are there differences between in race and socioeconomic status? I would love, or I say I know it's we, Tanya, we would love to hear a couple of voices, additional voices in the room. So if you would, if you'd like to share, if you're willing to share, if you want to be our academic risk taker, if you would unmute and maybe just give us a quick summary of the conversation that you and your partner had in your breakout room. Remember, I started with 7th grade math, so I'm great at wait time.
Well, I can share what I shared in the breakout room, and
Thanks, Theo.
we had 3 people, and I was the only professor who was currently teaching a gateway or introductory course. So I shared, and what I had most to say on was about some challenges that students identify, and I feel like sometimes they struggle with understanding what comes next. So for example, I'm in the Department of Communication Studies and I teach an intro course, and some of them don't know that much about our concentrations that they can specialize in after the intro courses. They may have misunderstandings about what one thing is or what the opportunities that another concentration would present. So I think they struggle with not having the rest of their course of study and their options that are available to them sort of laid out properly in the intro courses.
Awesome, Theo. I love that share out. First of all, I'm going snaps, virtual snaps for you, because I love the fact that you're tackling this from the student challenge perspective. And that idea of them knowing, right? We often will say, hey, it's in the course catalog. Sometimes our colleges and universities have college catalogs that are literally several hundred pages long. To expect a first-gen student, a first-time in college student to be able to navigate that, that's a challenge, absolutely. So thank you for calling that out, and that understanding of what comes next, right? They are often living in the here and now, so understanding what next semester holds in the semester after that. Thank you so much for calling that out. Bradford, I see you've got your hand up. We're just doing a quick share out, by the way. So if you joined us just after, I mean, sometimes the Zoom lets us in a little slower, a little later, but we're just doing a quick share out from our partner conversation. Go ahead, Bradford.
Thank you. I was with Kevin Johnson and Anthony Wheeler from Lehman. I'm from CSUSB in California, and we identified four issues in our very brief session. One, Anthony identified, was communication, which I think was related to what Theo was just talking about, which is students understanding what's required, what's available, how to get in there, and so on. Another one we identified is high school preparation for gateway courses like math, for instance. One that Kevin identified was student interest, that gateway courses usually will be beyond the student's major, so they're not as motivated to do well in those courses as they are in major courses in which they're very interested. And I suggested that technology gaps, digital divide could be an issue as well. Things like access to broadband internet, a quiet place to work. Kevin even suggested they may have to share computers and so on. That's what we came up with. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for reporting out for the whole group. That's awesome. Yeah, you know, I think about when we think about the basics of communication, right? How we interact with our students, how we share information with them. And when we just think about that communication piece as human beings, right? Just because we tell somebody something, does that mean they understood it? Does that mean they heard it, right? So the challenges related to communication, fantastic. Understanding the requirements, but also how to access, right? I really appreciate that you mentioned, you put that understanding the how part of it. So it's not just the requirements and the expectation, it's accessing the knowledge to actually navigate the how of the requirements and the expectation. Certainly when we think about high school preparation, student interest in the tech gaps, gosh, if we've learned anything, and we've learned a lot over the last 18 months, but we have learned that the technology gap that maybe we didn't think were that big of a deal are a huge deal and absolutely impact the students we're talking about today in a huge way. Mandy, I see you've added to the chat. I used to teach first year composition. On the first day of classes, I would always ask my students why they thought they were here and required to take a writing course regardless. Yeah, because again, right, they always had interesting responses, and students need to understand why we're asking them to engage in the gateway classes. I can't tell you how many welding students I would talk to weekly about why they had to take an English class or why they had to take a psychology class. So it's really important that we share that why with our students, just like we're making our own case today. Go ahead, David.
Well, Brian and I were sharing, and from his discipline of math and mine of communications and public relations, it was really interesting. We both hit on something that was interesting to both of us, that we have so many students that we see their senior year. It's a gateway course, but they're showing up their senior year. And most of the seniors that I have in many areas, they will say, gosh, I wish I'd taken this when I was a freshman. I mean, I was scared of public speaking, but I wish I'd taken this as a freshman because I've had to give informative speeches and reports in every class for the past 3.5 years. It would have been useful. It would have been helpful. And part of the challenge that both of us identified as being met is our institutions have put in better advising. Our school has about a 82% retention rate and about a 90% continuation of graduation rate. And for the past 4 or 5 years, we've been instituting a new advising model where they have a general advisor for the first year rather than an advisor within the discipline. And that's really keeping people focused on those gateway courses that they need to get in their freshman year or the first 3 or 4 semesters so that they're better prepared for the other courses. And it's had a huge impact on people taking the right courses and in the right sequence and early when they're supposed to.
Yes, I love it. Taking the right courses when they're supposed to, right? That almost intrusive advising. And I love how you've circled this right around to one of our kind of objectives of our, with regard to our work together today. When we think about, those systemic changes, right? What are those? What are those barriers that are in place sometimes that are just part of the the systems that we've got in place in the institution that we need to review, reflect, and change? Because if we're holding on to those old systems because that's the way we've always done it, then we're not likely to get any change. We're not likely to improve from that point. So I love the input. Before we move on, I'm going to give just a little bit of a breather here just to see if I've got anyone else who wants to jump in on the conversation. Thank you, Theo, David, and Bradford for jumping in and giving us a share out. We are laying some solid foundation related to this case making of why. This is great stuff. All right.
Okay, so we've had an opportunity to reflect on our practices, both in our courses as well as at the institution. And now we will analyze what the data reveals about teaching challenges in introductory courses. So I'd like to introduce this session by sharing that faculty who teach introductory classes play a very important role in designing and delivering courses that impact student retention and progression. High enrollment introductory level English, STEM, and other general education courses serve as gateways to degree paths, but often function as gatekeepers. And Trent mentioned this a little bit earlier in our session. So those high failure rates in these gateway courses lead to significant dropout numbers between students' first and second years, and disproportionately higher numbers for low income students and students of color. So let's pause just for a moment. And I'd love for us to reflect on these questions right here, these 2 questions. How does this data resonate with you? And what else are you noticing about faculty teaching gateway courses in your department or at your institution? So I'll just pause just for a moment. Let's see, I'll see what we say in the chat. Yep. Take a look at those numbers here. Faculty teaching gateway courses are more likely to have part-time non-tenured status than full-time. They tend to teach an average of 3 or more courses per term. They'll spend more than 13 hours per course per week. and they'll also teach an average course size of about 110 students. So how does this resonate with you? And I invite you to share your responses to either question in the chat, or you feel free to unmute. Any comments, observations?
Tanya, one of the things that jumps out at me is this, this idea of these courses that are so important. Again, when we talk about the gateway, this is the gateway to education, that these classes are so often taught by, like you mentioned, right? Part-time, non-tenured. And these are the students that are, when we think about students having access to the courses and access to their programs, this is powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Trent. I think
Let's see,
Rennie?
Rainey,
Yeah.
Rainey? Yeah.
Renee.
Renee,
sorry.
I was just going
Renee.
to comment about the fact that if the average course size is 110 with 3 classes, that's 36 students for a class. And for gateway courses, to some of our faculty, depending on where they're at, it's almost untenable. Given the fact that now we have online classes and we have high flex attributes and modalities to be able to layer on top of already a rigorous syllabus, it's challenging. And then, as you said earlier, when you factor in an adjunct faculty who's kind of mobile, these are among our important classes, of most important classes for them to be able to graduate on time. And so that just, to me, just outlines more of the challenges that we have in dealing with the needs of our students, but also the needs of our faculty that seem the ongoing things that the faculty need to be able to adapt to in this new environment.
Very good. Yeah. So the large size classes, and then how do you respond? How can you be responsive to your students? How can you make sure that you're really focusing on each student, which is really difficult if you have a class size that large? I see Bradford, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you. I come from the same department as Theo, another member of our team, which is communication studies. And of course, one of the big 4 gateway courses is oral communication. Mm-hmm. And I know our department, we do cap, at least when I was there, we capped oral communication at 25 students to try to well, for one reason, of course, it's a kind of performance course. So with more than that, it's not practical to get everybody to do four speeches. But I wonder if anyone can give a perspective of a mathematics gateway course or composition gateway course. My impression is the mathematics courses are really the ones that have higher drop, fill, withdraw, and incomplete rates. Thank you.
That's a great question. Is there anyone here who could respond to that? No math faculty today, it looks like. Looks like Justin has a question here. So what role does tenure status and qualifications of obtaining tenure play in the quality of teaching a student may receive in these gateway courses? That's a great question. I'll put that out to the group. I could respond a little bit. I think in terms of tenure status and part-time faculty, oftentimes, and there's research that supports this, part-time faculty don't receive the same professional development or access to the same professional development that full-time faculty might, or they may not receive the same information that full-time faculty are receiving related to the resources that are available on campus to students, for instance. We know that at some institutions, they don't necessarily have a place to hang their hat, right? They don't have an office where they can meet with students either. And so all of these kind of compound, right, in their ability to then be responsive to student needs, right? So it's not necessarily the tenure status so much as the part-time versus full-time status. And then are we giving those supports to part-time faculty so that they then could support students in the classroom?
So,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
oh,
Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
so that leads me to the question as we go through this. Is this so much about potentially closing that equity gap for students, or is it providing also a role in this is providing equitable access for our non-tenured part-time faculty that are teaching these courses?
Yeah, I would say it's both, right? We know that if we provide the same opportunities to our part-time faculty in terms of their professional development, in terms of communications and access to the information that they need, that will then translate to better and close those equity gaps that we're seeing with students in the classroom. So we'll close those equity gaps with students as well. But then also to center it on the conversation for today around digital learning, there are tools that we can implement in our courses, full-time and part-time, that can then help to be more responsive to our students, make sure that students are getting that timely feedback that they need. So there's a few different strategies and tools that we'll talk about today that will help to close those gaps that we're seeing.
Yeah, Tanya, you make a great point. I mean, it would almost be, borderline irresponsible as educators if we expected, and we think about all of our educational colleagues, right? But if we expect folks to improve equity and access for all students, and then don't provide them with the tools, the knowledge, the information, the opportunity to engage, then we're leaving them shorthanded in the effort. As well-meaning or well-intentioned as they might be, if they don't have the tools and the access and opportunity themselves, then they're not only are just like our students, right? They're going to get frustrated and be more likely to throw in the towel than be fully engaged in the work. And Tanya, you also make a great point about a colleague of mine did some research around adjunct faculty and their feelings about being connected to the campus. Now, there are some campuses that do a great job. Norma, to your point, there are adjunct that are incredibly well connected and have rolled up their sleeves to do the work to meet the needs of all students. But when we are in a space where folks are part-time or maybe doing other jobs, again, this can be reflected in our students as well. When our students are part-time and have other jobs, we know that those become obstacles or barriers. But just this idea of feeling connected to the campus, being part of the professional learning, having access, Justin, to your point, having access to the information and the tools, those are all critical parts of helping our educational colleagues be as successful as they possibly can. And to Tanya's point, we know that, again, what the last 18 months has shown us is that there are digital tools available that can provide a lot more access and opportunity for our students in providing that equitable space for our students.
Yeah, thank you, Trent. Great. That's a great segue to our next slide, which is actually a poll where we're going to investigate, what are some of the instructional solutions that we could actually address these key barriers to student success and close those equity gaps, right? So what are some of our instructional strategies that we can employ? And some of these solutions might also be challenges, right? So we're gonna do a real quick poll here. And we're gonna ask you, what are some of the solutions that you may have used that can address key barriers to student success in your gateway courses? And we have some options here: curating and delivering content, personalizing learning, and we have definitions for each up here on the slide, providing feedback, engaging our students, increasing equity and access, and potentially other challenges. So take a couple of minutes to respond. And once everyone responds, we'll put the results up on the screen. All right, so we have the results here, and it looks like we have a tie between engaging students and increasing equity and access. And then an even split between personalized learning and providing feedback. And then we have about 8% in other, and I'd love to drill down into that other if somebody would like to volunteer their response there. Yes, Bradford.
Thank you. And maybe this actually fits in one of the other categories, such as engaging students. But I immediately thought of a project that our Tanner Carollo, who's our interim director of institutional research, he's on the call with us now. He's leading a project where we're trying to implement a kind of early warning system based on student. One marker is student access to the LMS, and other markers that really show the students are not engaging with the course in the way that they need to in a timely way. And that would then, that those provide data for the instructor to reach out to the student to try to get them to get going while there's still time. Thank you.
That's
and
great.
Tanner, please jump in if you would.
Sure, I can add a little bit more to that. So we are trying to get to the LMS data. Obviously, that's only going to work for those courses that are documenting everything in the LMS. But we want to try to leverage that also with some authentication data, because one of the things that we're dealing with, and this is somewhat anecdotal, but I'm sure others can relate, is not necessarily a disengagement from the course, but just a disengagement from potentially their academics as a whole. Disengaging from the university, not participating, not connecting. So the hope is to not only look towards the LMS data for, are they not reading the syllabus in a timely manner? Are they not completing assignments? But also, are they just not signing into any student materials? Are they not logging into their portal? Are they not checking their email? And those students obviously represent a group of students that's not going to be reached by sending them an email saying, hey, we see that you're struggling. We're here to help you. Those students are going to need much more of that triage, personal call outreach to try to get them to reconnect. And obviously, the sooner you can do that, the better, because waiting until grades are posted to say, hey, we see you didn't do well is a little too late there. So
yeah. That's excellent. That's a great example. Thank you, Bradford and Tanner, for sharing that. And this is a great example of using technology, data, and performance data about our students, and really drilling in to understand who our students are, and how are they engaging, how are they not engaging, and then how can we use that technology to really personalize our approach with each of those students, right? How are we reaching out to the student? You're investigating if they're not even accessing their email, sending an email as a touch point is not going to be very effective. So asking those kinds of questions, how is the student engaging? How can I reach out most effectively to them to draw them back in and then get them the resources that they need to be successful? These are exactly the right questions to be asking. So, and that all, is responsive to this, how are we personalizing the learning experience? How are we giving students feedback, right? Not just in our courses, but at the institution. And that's why it's so important, especially when we talk about this information today, we're always looking at it from the vantage point of the institution and how can we scale our efforts, right? Not just in the course, but at the institution itself. So excellent. That's great feedback. I see a couple of other hands. We have Justin and Kevin. Let's start with Kevin first.
I just wanted to mention that at Lehman College, instead of each instructor reaching out to those students who well, don't check their emails. We have a system by which we let the advisors know what the student's progress is, and then it's the advisors' tasks now to reach out to those students and to then communicate back with the instructors. And they are more experienced in doing that kind of thing than instructors are.
Yep. So you're bringing in partners at the institution, right? So you have to have a strong relationship with student services and advisors. That's a great point, right? So we're not operating in silos. We have to have those connections to other people at the institution as we support our students. Excellent.
Very true. We actually have an automated system.
Automated.
You don't have to
Okay.
actually know them. You just click, this student, that student,
Gotcha.
and it goes to whichever advisor is assigned to that student.
So you have some technology. Yeah.
In the end, we do build relationships because they get back to us, and then
Right.
we know which ones of them are more responsive, which ones are not, etc.
Great. Thank you. And Justin, we'll take one more.
Yeah, so my question with this is as I'm hearing this, and this may be the diversity and inclusion in me coming out, it seems to me that there has to be a level of communication with students in this and in this process. And one of the things that I've seen is the hesitancy, and I'm even going to be more specific with this, the hesitancy of white faculty members to communicate with underrepresented students. And so can some of this get rectified by providing a quote unquote toolkit, resource guide for faculty members to feel how to have those conversations without feeling uncomfortable and without feeling fragile?
Yeah. Would you mind, for the good of the group, to kind of give a little bit more information around the types of questions that you're seeing white faculty specifically being uncomfortable asking students about?
Oh, sure. So here's a classic example. Justin, Black student, has not come to Communications 101 or public speaking class for 3 weeks. Faculty member puts out this alert, but the next class period, Justin shows up to class. Said professor may not feel comfortable walking up to Justin to have that conversation about, hey, Justin, hey, what's going on? Have you missed, you missed 4 classes? Is it something that I need to be aware of? Is there something I can help you with? Vice versa, can go through a bunch of different conversations. And what I've seen is that there's that fear of being able to have that conversation because they don't know what I, as a Black person, or I, as a Hispanic or Latina, Latinx, or Indigenous person, because they don't know what the next statement that I'm gonna make. And so the best thing to do is either 1, avoid it, or 2, kind of some of the things I see from time to time, we call the diversity and inclusion office and say, hey, Justin, can you have this conversation? Well, this Justin hasn't attended class. Can you find out what's going on, or do you know what's going on with said student?
That's a great example. One, I think if you approach every student that you have with empathy and care, you can never go wrong, right? And there is a resource that we can provide. We can actually upload this to the LMS around this notion of care for our students. And it's a guidebook that can walk faculty through, how do we extend care to our students? How can we reach out to students in an empathetic way, especially minoritized students. So we can provide that resource. I think it would be helpful for faculty to read that and really kind of scrutinize, their communication and how are they approaching students and their willingness to approach students. So the sense of belonging, the sense of care, the sense of empathy in every interaction that we have with our student should facilitate, opening up the conversation, bridging that gap in the conversation and communicating effectively with students. So we can absolutely provide that resource in the LMS.
Thank you.
Sure. Excellent. I'm just going to check the chat really quick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. So Norma and Patty are on it. They know exactly what I'm referring to. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so this was a great conversation. Thank you for your transparency and for being open and sharing. I think it's important to have these conversations so that we could talk through resources and approaches and strategies. So we've had an opportunity now to kind of gauge the top solutions and challenges within our group. And so we're going to take a look at what other instructors across the country are saying about their challenges that they're facing in their introductory level courses.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me, right, that we're kind of right in the ballpark. When we think about what other faculty are saying at other institutions across the country, where increasing equity and access and engaging students are right there at the top, providing that feedback. And the reality for us and our own poll with our group was very much along those lines. So when we look at this data and really focusing on this idea that 56% of faculty teaching introductory courses face some combination of challenges, right? So when we think about this idea that it's one or the other, it's a reminder that there's not a magic wand, right? We can't just do this and fix that. That correlation doesn't exist, but the correlation by Tanya, to your point, right? When we think about the care and empathy we have for our students, when we think about providing those safe, positive environments for our students, when we think about engaging students with digital tools to provide that equitable access to their learning, we're creating that environment where we are able then to look at multiple pieces of this. So when we take a look at these pieces for our group, which instructional challenges are top priorities for you to focus on in this session and why? So when we take a look at what the data says nationally and what the poll we just did together, I'm just going to pause here and give you a few seconds to reflect on that prompt. Which instructional challenges are top priorities for you to focus on in this session and why? Go ahead and drop that into the chat. And again, if there's anyone that would like to just unmute and share, that would be great too. Thanks, Patty. Thank you for dropping all those prompts into the chat for us.
Looks like Bradford has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Tanya. Bradford, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so chatty today.
That's
I'm just a question about these the first challenge. I'm just wondering if equity, the term, if it really implies it's a complicated factor with many sub-factors, and one aspect of it may be outcomes, that we want outcome, like student learning outcomes, to be more equal across groups, and it seems to me it's a more complicated and maybe more outcome-oriented factor than some of the other ones listed after that. And some of the other ones listed after that bear on equity. So just some gratuitous musing. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are the kind of conversations as we think about, making this case, right? When we started this whole thing in terms of case making, these are the exact kinds of conversations, and Bradford, the exact kind of questions at an institutional level that need to happen. One instructor or a small group of instructors can be very passionate about improving or increasing equity and access. Another group might be really focused on engaging, using engaging instructional strategies. But as Tanya mentioned earlier, we really want to be generating this idea of being able to work with our peers across the the entire institution. So we're moving the needle, not for a small group of students, but all of the students at our institution. Mike, I see that you've unmuted. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I understand the reason that these percentages came out the way they did, although preventing cheating is a really curious item by itself. I think increasing in equity and access is the starting point, although to me, from an instructional perspective, there's more of an institutional level to that. Economics and finance, for example. I think engaging with students, if I were to speak on behalf of our institution, is probably the key, because it seems that every other item listed there follows that you have to have a connection between teacher and student in that relationship, and also as colleagues in learning, before any of those other engagement tools would even have any chance of success. So I would say that, any strategies for how to develop that engagement, and it sort of goes to Justin's point, that it starts with conversation and comfort in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely, right. Creating those intentional spaces and those intentional opportunities, digging into equity and equity related work, being inclusive in that work, being inclusive and engaging with all students. These are great questions and aha moments, right? As we think about, there's not a simple answer, but the work that has to be done in order to move the needle for all students, more specifically for the students that we're talking about, those students that are minoritized. So throughout the session, right, we've invited you to reflect on data, the student voices, and your small group discussions that we had earlier, as we think about, again, making the case for the how of evidence-based teaching strategies and student-centered instruction that is instrumental to support equity and access for minoritized students within institutions. So let's just take a minute as we think about the key takeaways from those instructional challenges. As I mentioned, right, 56% of faculty face a combination of those challenges. When we think about engaging, providing feedback, increasing equity and access, these things aren't, as you all have called out, they're very much interrelated. When we think about engaging students, we can't engage all students without being cognizant of increasing equity and access to and for all students. Providing feedback, if we're not providing regular, ongoing, timely feedback to all students, then some of those students are not receiving the information they need to change course or to continue on the course and be successful in their gateway courses. So let's just take a second to think through the prompt on the screen. How can you best communicate these challenges to peers within your institution? So I know there are a couple of peer groups or collegial groups in our session together right now, but be thinking of a broader perspective. How can you best communicate these challenges to your peers within your institution as we think about making institutional and systemic changes?
Just checking in with Mike. I see you have your hand up still.
Mike forgot to put his hand down.
Okay.
Are we putting
I thought it automatically just goes off when you stop talking somehow.
It sometimes takes a little bit of time, but you're good.
Are we putting our responses in the chat?
Yes, thank you, Renee. Absolutely, that'd be great.
Well, feel free to unmute as well. Love to hear your voice.
Let me do that instead of typing because my fingers are getting tired. I think one of the best ways to communicate our challenges is to be able to it's not really any of these, but if you're looking at having the conversation throughout the college, it has to be rooted in data to drive the conversation. So, what what gaps are there in equity and access? What student feedback do we have about their engagement in the process of their first semester? And what feedback do the faculty have in their what they're seeing as challenges, right? So if you do a cross qual and quan, you could start the conversation so that everyone feels a part of what the work that we have to do involves them.
Great points. Great points. Go ahead, Bradford.
Bradford
muted,
is
bud.
chatty today.
Yeah, that's right.
And here I'm going to try to be a little provocative, which is, we all have many people on our campus who think about this question full time in their jobs and have done so for years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering what is it that we're going to learn and do that's going to make a difference that all these professionals, are not able to do. Thank you.
That's a big, meaty question. That is
really
provocative. Yeah.
It really is. I think that's it. As we think about spending time together, the rest of our time today, we've got about another 45 minutes. But as we look forward, Bradford, I always think it's critical that having those conversations, and to Renee's point, bringing that data, right? So this is national data. Is the national data similar or dissimilar from your institutional data? Where are the gaps, as we mentioned earlier, as we think about those outcome gaps? Are you having the conversations? Are you asking the right questions? So when we say, excuse me, X number of students from the minoritized group of students aren't being successful, what are the conversations that are taking place after that question is being asked, after that data is being reviewed? To Renee's point, if your institution reviews that data and sees that there is a gap with minoritized students, then what's the conversation that's taking place after that? And that's really when we think about digging into the conversations that we're having, that you all are having now, and we'll have together over the next number of sessions, right? Just being able to sit down with your colleagues and continue to make that case. Because I'm going back to the Padlet here for just a second. When we first started off, it is very easy sometimes for our educational colleagues to point, right? I always talk about looking out the window to observe what's going on, but at the same time, looking in the mirror to see what I'm doing or what we're doing as an institution. Are the students not motivated, or are we not using the right digital tools to engage our students, right? Do our students, do they don't seem to care about continuing with their studies, or are we not building connections and relational capacity and community holistically with our students, right? So the kind of questions that you can ask and the conversations that result are how I believe, and I think we believe, I won't speak for Tanya, but I think we believe that that's the way that we continue to move that conversation forward. So to your point, we are filling the gap, right?
Yeah, and I'm just curious, Bradford, at your institution, who does work on this full time outside of the faculty?
Well, maybe it's overstating to say they work on it full time, but it is of course a high priority for the leaders in academic affairs, from the provost to the deputy provost, to the deans, to the department chairs.
Yeah, and we talk about educators as being inclusive of all of those folks, right? So I think, there's been a misnomer in education, higher education, where we kind of separate administration from faculty, and it's breaking down those silos and then having those joint conversations that are so critical, right? Where we can crowdsource these solutions together. Because faculty, I've been faculty, it could be very lonely, right? We're kind of on our own little island where we're taking care of our courses. And I think breaking through and having these more collaborative conversations is so critical. And I'm so happy that everyone here is courageous and brave to just be open and transparent about their vulnerability in this space too, because that's how we can get to solutions, right? And so I think this is why this conversation is so crucial, and I'm appreciating the engagement, quite honestly. Great. Oh, Trent, you're on mute.
Yeah,
There we
yeah,
go.
I got it. Thanks. Sorry, y'all. My dogs were barking. Literally, my dogs were barking. I muted, and then I told myself, "Don't forget to unmute." But yeah, I agree, Tanya. I think, engaging, asking those questions, right? Why will this conversation make a difference? When we think about the folks that have had their sleeves rolled up and have made equity and access a priority to date, those gaps still exist. So we need to continue to reflect and review, and we need to continue to have those conversations in a meaningful way so that we're bringing more people, we're being inclusive with our colleagues so that we can be inclusive with our students. So as we think about this, we're going to give you an opportunity to just do a little more reflection as well. When we think about, and thank you for adding, we've got some Kevin in the chat, the fact that my college provides access to training like this is important. Absolutely. Right? These conversations are also going on in union meetings. Look, absolutely. I've worked with places where their unions are making this work a priority. They're seeing the gaps. They know that if we're not affecting this change in our colleges institutionally, then our communities suffer as a result, because there are groups of students, whole groups of students that aren't getting access, aren't getting equitable access to educational opportunities. So great points. Thanks for dropping those comments in the chat as well. So let's do a quick check-in, reflect, and connect. And just in your notes, however you're taking notes, how do the challenges of the data resonate with your experience? And I think we've had some of that conversation already, so thank you for that. Who do you need to connect with at your institution to help make the case with your peers? And again, I think we're already bridging that conversation. And what questions do you have? And we can hold on to those questions as we think about our work together in our next sessions, because we are going to dig more into the how.
David has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Well, and I almost hesitate to say something, but at the same time, the question does come to mind. There are every now and then either a discipline or a department that does not do a good job of feedback, does not do a good job of engaging. And through benign neglect, that continues. It becomes almost a tradition. And we're not talking about unnecessarily uneven impact on students that are underserved. We're talking across the board that are impacted by it. At the same time, I would also like to raise the question about access to training. And if you have departments, or you have disciplines, or you just have groups of faculty in general that do not take advantage of professional development. One of our biggest challenges is getting people to take advantage of professional development and to improve certain things in their pedagogy. It's, my go-to response, and Justin will verify this, my go-to response is there's always duct tape and tasers, but they tend to frown on that.
So look, David, and again, I think when we're having a conversation about case making, right, that why, that how do we engage our peers at some point, right, at an institutional level, if the priority is to engage in trainings like this, if the priority is to have the conversation, if the priority is to close those equity gaps, those access gaps, then those are conversations that need to be facilitated, right? So yes, again, is there a magic wand to make that happen? Of course not. Is it an issue that's been going on for decades? Absolutely. But I was working with a group of folks late last week, and one of the folks said, it is time for us to never again say, look to your left, look to your right, one of you will not be here at the end of the semester, right? And I say that not in jest, but because when I was in college, that was said in almost every course. And there are folks around, colleagues of mine that still like to say that with kind of this idea of almost like a a sense of pride, right? That they're gonna, but I hold so closely to what this person said in a workshop last week, that it is time for us to never say that again, right? So when we think about this idea of how we are connecting with our students, how we're having conversations with our colleagues about connecting with our students, the research and data is on our side. Renee, to your point earlier, let's look at the data. Let's look at our institutional data. Let's talk about national data, because even when we're doing a really good job at our institution, and we might be, we might have started to identify some of those gaps and started closing some of those gaps. We might have started doing some great work on equity, but there's more work to be done, right? There are more conversations to be had. And so bringing the national data, bringing high impact, this sense of evidence-based student-centered instruction, that is, if you typed in instruction in higher ed 10 years ago, lecture was the top 10,000 results that you would get. And now that's not the case, right? So we know that the landscape in higher education is changing, and we are okay to have the conversations about bringing more folks into the fold around closing equity gaps for our students. Yeah, thank you, Norma. That's sometimes the sad truth. So let's continue to dig in. Sorry, go ahead.
I was first going to say, now that we're a community, I want to share something with you that I heard that's untrue. David Schattinger said, I hesitate to say something, and that's not true. He always says what he's thinking.
Thanks, Mike.
This is a former faculty senate president. I just want you
I've been outed.
In response to the question, I wanted to point out that, leaders often say, when you bring a problem to me, please start with a solution as well. And I think one of the things that will help at our institution, at least, is if we approach the conversation first with some solutions to seed actions and the resources to do it. So what you need to connect with people is to say, here's a possible thing we can do, and here's the resources to do it. I think the challenge is for me as a dean is actually not money, it's time. How do I find people the time to work on these things?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, when I think about the systems we have in place in our institutions, it's often systems that either get in the way or allow us to dig in and have additional time to do that. Theo, you want one more ad?
Yes, please. Thank you. So I wanted to bring to the conversation the issue of subjectivity. And it seems, particularly with regard to engaging students and providing feedback, that some instructors just have the ability to really facilitate an inclusive conversation, for example, better than others do, and to give feedback that is actually detailed and helpful rather than sort of, punitive. And so I wondered, how we can move, especially when thinking about how we can share insights with the department, to a set of best practices that are broad enough to be applicable to many instructors, but also specific enough that can actually be implemented, rather than just talking about engagement, specific, strategies and methods that a variety of instructors can use, but also customize and tailor to their own strengths.
Yeah, I could jump in there. We do have some resources we could provide around that. Unfortunately, we're getting low on time, so I can't go too much into depth about it, but we can add some resources to the LMS. But then also, when we think about digital learning and adaptive courseware specifically, there's opportunity there to be able to provide feedback to students that's a little bit more robust, that's a little bit more inclusive. So we can provide some resources around that too. Yeah, great point, Theo.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and shift gears a little bit. We're
gonna have to skip the break.
Yeah, we're gonna keep rolling. We're on a roll here, so we're gonna keep on moving through this, but let's shift gears a little bit and take a look at student learning challenges in the Gateway courses. Right, so based on your observations and interactions with your students, what are some challenges your students face in Gateway courses? I mean, think about those student challenges and gateway courses. Just drop any of your thoughts into the chat. We've got several examples on the slide, right? The access to academic support. The hardest part for me was adjusting to tutoring. I'd been with a personal tutor, and then we had to do all of our tutoring on Zoom. It was the setup was much different. My greatest challenge was when we go online was being able to ask the TAs questions. So when we think about access to course materials, I drive 1 hour to Starbucks in the next town to have internet access to complete my assignments. Gosh, one of you already called that out, right? Access to broadband or workable broadband coming from a low-income household in a rural community. I did not understand the need for a computer until college. By then I had a lot of catching up to do. Lack of instructor support and untimely feedback made it challenging. My instructors aren't grading assignments in a timely manner, so I don't know how I'm doing. There's a time delay on almost anyone getting back to me. Sometimes I just give up or ask a classmate to teach me. When teachers provide a lot of different learning options and opportunities in remote learning world, things are so much better. Everyone doesn't learn the same. So just a few selections when we think about those the student voice. Justin and I will share that when I mentioned in the breakout room, confusion and expectation within transition from high school to college, right? That transition, it's absolute navigation that needs to take place. And absolutely definite gaps in that navigation. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, and what I add to it is, well, we had this discussion in our breakout room. You know, I use the example for my son. My son is a 10th grader right now. And so he has an assignment that's due on Wednesday, and he doesn't turn the assignment in on Wednesday. And then his teacher says, oh, don't worry about it. You can turn it in next week. And then you come to college and the assignment is due on Wednesday, and the assignment is due on Wednesday. And so, you know, I think that understanding what those expectations are as it relates to due dates and timelines and different things like that, you know, it gets kind of confusing because then there's, if you don't turn it in, like right now in high school, there's different ways where I can get the extra credit to make up the points and different things like that. And you may not have that as I transition into college. So how can we effectively communicate? You know, we always say, well, college is a whole different world, but how do we communicate that when it's not being practiced with our senior students?
Yeah, those are great great questions. I'm also seeing student confusion over how to integrate what they've learned. I also see there's one other piece in here, obstacle understanding the time commitment for each class. Absolutely. When I tell them this isn't baby school, this is college. Yeah.
Just to add to the conversation, the TILT framework is a really great framework around communicating expectations to students and just having that transparency. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a wonderful resource, and it gives really good guidelines around. It's a little bit tricky to find. I'll find the link. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and we'll make sure we add that to the LMS as well. And it just gives really great feedback.
Can I toss in a real quick point?
Yeah.
2 of the faculty who are involved in the TILT framework are going to be speaking at our Strategies for Success this Thursday, and 2 of the instructional designers will be on January 28th. So if you're really wanting to hear more about the TILT framework personally, we have those webinars coming up.
Excellent. Thank you, Norma.
Thanks, Norma. Yeah, Deborah, you make a great point there. Feel free to unmute and share if you're able to, right? You're absolutely right. Quick feedback is so important, right? Not just for learning, but for personal connections. And your however is valid, right? So, and I think about when Tanya first kicked us off with our outcomes and our goals for our session and our conversation together, those systemic changes, right? When we know that this is critical, then something else has to give, right? If we're saying that we don't have time, or if we don't have access to our students, or our teaching load is too much, I think this gives us an opportunity as educators to, again, use the equity gaps as a way to leverage an opportunity to have conversations. Maybe it's with administration, maybe it's with department chairs to say, look, in order for us to connect with these students in a meaningful way, in order for us to do what the research tells us to do, provide meaningful feedback in a timely manner, we need to be able to do this in a timely manner for ourselves, right? As part of our load. So let's, Tanya, if we're good, we'll take a look at frequencies of barriers to online learning.
Perfect, great. So here we're going to review some data and we're going to highlight these top challenges for racially minoritized students. So we'll see here, these are student responses that we've collected around barriers to online learning by race and ethnicity. So we have minoritized and non-minoritized students. And I'm just going to draw your attention to 3 specific categories: not knowing where to get help with the course, fitting the course in with your home and family responsibilities, and then this last one, which is basically fitting the course into your work schedule where you're receiving payment. And we see here there's an 11% gap for those top 2 categories and an 8% gap in that bottom one. We focus on these specifically because we do have some locus of control over how we design our courses to be able to meet these barriers that our students are seeing here. So the implication here is that minoritized students are more likely to report barriers to completion. This is evident across all of the categories. And this means that the ways that we are designing our coursework for students today is just not sufficient. So let's move to the next slide, and we're going to look at the data for students from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And you're going to see it's very similar, right? We're really seeing very similar results when we're looking at socioeconomic backgrounds. And so we have 2 questions. Are these challenges consistent with your respective institution? And what resources and strategies are in place to address these specific challenges? We'll talk about this as a group together. I'll pop those questions in the chat. So are these challenges consistent with your respective institution? And what resources and strategies are in place to address these challenges that you're aware of? Yeah. First generation dimension, yep, which is amplified by minoritized status. Excellent point, Mike.
Along with the first gen status, there's a gap in social and cultural capital where students are working to feed their families and not to supplement their income, especially with the pandemic. So when we say that we have the ability to kind of offer some suggestions, short of being online, which is not the panacea to students and their learning, we're often challenged by them coming in with pre-challenges that just basically address the top 3 needs in Maslow's hierarchy, where education is like a distant 4th or 5th. And that's something that we're grappling at our institution, where the unemployment rate in our borough is one of the highest among all of New York City. So it's definitely a challenge. And there's some things that we could do, but there's also some things that we can't as an institution, and we need to be able to also know our limits on that.
Great point, great point. Other observations? I'm seeing a lot of agreement that these are common challenges. Yeah, and that's why these conversations are important, because we need to be able to respond with our peers and our institutions collectively, right? Individually, it would be very difficult to be able to respond to these, but as a team, as a community, this is where we can solution around meeting these students' needs. I see. Great, Kevin. So Renee and Kevin are from the same institution, administrator and instructor. And that's wonderful to see, because then you can have those conversations together, right? Breaking down those silos. Any other observations before we move on? Okay, let's move ahead. So the key takeaway then from this data is that minoritized and poverty affected students face significantly more challenges in successfully completing gateway courses due to systemic barriers, contributing to equity gaps that can be bridged by evidence-based teaching practices. So we've learned from implementing digital learning specifically that it can address students' challenges around work and family responsibilities. And this is an illustrative but not exhaustive list of the positive impacts of digital learning on equitable course design. And furthermore, considering the traumatic impact of the pandemic and its disproportionate toll on racially minoritized communities, using technology to connect with students to check in, as shared in the example on our slide, can help to create empathetic relationships and safe learning environments, right? So students are looking for those tangible interactions with faculty. And so what are some of the positive impacts that you've witnessed with implementing digital learning approaches with your students? Love to hear you about your strategies. We'll just talk as a group.
If I may.
Yes.
Kevin. With the pandemic and the move to online education, CUNY is a system of universities, right? Like 26 different institutions. Mm-hmm. And there is a facility to take classes in a different institution from your home institution. So what I've noticed is that students are making use of this facility. They're communicating, finding instructors that they feel are better suited to their needs, etc., and going from institution to institution in the search of a better learning experience. And it is a great development, in my opinion. It's like a freedom of, like movement within or multiple institutions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else?
I don't know if anybody else has used their COVID or CARES money to outfit their classrooms with a high flex modality, but I've got to actually see it in learning with faculty, and the ability for students to be online and others to be in person, and for that faculty member to teach both is really yeoman's work. It takes special training. It's difficult enough to be able to manage a classroom, but to manage a classroom and online learning. It's been a tremendous benefit to our students to get them to have that flexibility. And it's also stretching our faculty to use other types of modalities to be able to help with teaching.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, Renee, I love that, right? Whereas it wasn't that long ago where we would just have faculty saying, I don't want to teach online, I don't want to learn digital tools, but what we've learned is that there's an incredible opportunity for us to leverage those digital tools in both the face-to-face and online space, as well as that high flex modality you mentioned as well.
I have to underscore that if the administration is not interested in investing in faculty to really learn these and to give them time to integrate it into their syllabus and their teaching modalities, it won't work. So, it's a lot of money and a lot of investment, but I think the institution also has to invest in its faculty so that they have an opportunity to really use this in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. Institutional support is crucial. Absolutely. Well, that takes us to our take action goals.
Yeah, so let's just take a second to reflect, and we're actually going to pop you into quick breakout rooms here in just a second. But before we go into your breakout rooms, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds here just to reflect on these two prompts. How does this information change the way you think about designing gateway courses to ensure student access? And then there's what is one thing you can do in your course right now as you take as your take action goal? So how does this information change the way you think about designing gateway courses to ensure student access? What is one thing you can do in your course right now as your take action goal? Norma has dropped a Google Doc into the chat as well, and we're going to pop you into small breakout rooms, helping trios likely, maybe partners are helping trios, to just share your responses to these two questions. And if you will, you can access that Google Doc that's in the chat and add your responses to the Google Doc, and then we'll have that as a resource as we move forward as well. So this will be relatively quick breakout rooms for us as we get into our short rows, 4 minutes, as you can see on Norma's post. Any questions before we pop you into your breakout rooms to discuss these two prompts? All right, we will see you in 4 minutes.
Welcome back, everyone.
All right, yes, welcome, welcome. Good to have you back, and good to see really enjoy having access to Google Slides and Google Docs when we're working in the virtual space. Gives us an opportunity to see some of the work actually taking place. I would like to invite one, sorry, maybe if you haven't had a chance to share with the group yet, to give us maybe jump in and give us a quick report out, as we'd love to hear additional voices in the room. Don't be shy if you haven't had a chance.
This is just like working with a room full of freshmen.
It is, yeah, it is.
Yeah, I can share what we
Thanks,
discussed. Yeah, so our team is Theo and Douglas. It's Cal State San Bernardino. What we discussed is the first question, we can maybe, because the survey data, personally, I don't teach actually introductory or gateway course. However, I think a lot of that, I can infer from my master level courses. Our students also go through a lot of, time management challenges. So especially if it's online, I think our university at the level, they developed something and they put it onto the LMS. So the student can take kind of like time management, netiquette, those things. So I would emphasize them on how to manage their time, because students can easily procrastinate their online discussion responsibilities. Time was fast. So that's one idea we talk about. And another one is we may develop some resources or materials in advance, like apply the flipped classroom approach, so they can review videos, readings in advance, and then provide them. But another concern was, do they really watch it? How can we ensure that they review all those materials that we provide in advance? So one thing is maybe we developed some pop-up quiz to check their understandings. That's one thing. And I think Theo also mentioned about it at the personal level in his course, he would provide more detailed feedback to his students. Yeah, Theo, awesome. And Douglas, if I missed anything, please add.
No, thank you.
Sorry, I was just saying I can give specifics on that. What I'm, for example, in a course syllabus that I just designed was with regard to their final essay. So I already meet with them, or at least offer individual meetings with them about that. So I'm adding a component where they submit a thesis sentence and outline, which will give me another concrete opportunity to give them feedback. So trying to build in at least one and maybe more specific opportunities for feedback.
Awesome. Well, folks, as we say in Eastern North Carolina, as a farming community, we are in the short rows. We are in the very shortest of short rows, right? But before we wrap things up, I'm going to tell you what, I've been inspired. Tanya, I'm not going to speak for you, but I can tell by the expression on your face that this has been great, right? Right from the get-go with those initial Padlet posts, we are inspired by your ideas and your actions. The conversation that has taken place. When we next gather, we'll be excited to hear how this is working, how the work is going, and then how it is felt to, in many cases, continue moving forward, not just get started. But we want to give you an opportunity to provide us some feedback as well. In your own notes and reflections, of course, don't hesitate to keep making those notes. We dropped, there's a link in the chat right now, but I do want to remind you our parking lot Padlet from earlier. If you do have any burning questions or something that you didn't get a chance to share with the group and you really want to, please add that. You can scroll back through the chat, or maybe we can drop that in the chat, that initial Padlet one more time, our parking lot Padlet, just in case there are any burning questions. And as we wrap things up, we have dropped an evaluation, a brief survey for you to complete, for us to give us some feedback with regard to our session, so we can continue to move our work forward as well. Tanya?
Yeah, so our next case making session, which will be next week, we'll build upon today's session and take a deeper dive to address evidence-based teaching practices and student needs, as well as digital learning and evidence-based teaching. And as a result of these two-part sessions, you'll be able to make a strong case to build institutional capacity to serve Black, Latinx, Indigenous, poverty-affected, and first-generation students through digital learning with an equity-minded focus. We'll be sure to update the LMS with the resources that we discussed today. Please continue to add to those documents that we've been linking through and go back and reflect upon, some of the comments that have been included there. We've had wonderful engagement today, really outstanding engagement. I've really appreciated everyone's courage and bravery in being transparent. And, please be sure to complete that survey, because we do take that information and improve our sessions. We want to make sure we're responsive in meeting your needs and your questions as well. And we so look forward to working with you next week. Same time, same place, just a different day.